Alrighty, folks, welcome to the Tuesday live stream. I'm on today with John Willis from Special Operations Equipment, and you just never know what you're going to get on a Tuesday. Doug and Andy stopped by from Hand Hewn Farm. Guys, how's it going?
Doing pretty well.
Pretty good.
So for the three people in our feed who don't know who you are and what you do, give us like the quick down and dirty on Hand Hewn Farm and like how you guys got into what you're doing and what you're doing.
Have at it, Doug.
Wow, that's a big question. So for starters, we do butchering workshops. We teach people how to, generally speaking, go from the live animal all the way through butchered cuts, as well as kind of more refined culinary practices, predominantly in the way of charcuterie. We do those workshops at our farm, and then we travel around to other farms and do them as well. We've been doing it now for this will be our 9th year. We've been doing it as a business. Prior to that, we did it for 5 years on a smaller homestead scale. So
awesome. And like, what made you decide to go down the path of growing, butchering, processing, like all of that you do?
When Doug and I started doing a lot of this stuff, we lived on separate tiny homesteads. And we loved drinking beer, so we started making our own beer together. And our wife, both of us had really small children at the time, and our wives got along, so we took advantage of that and made lots of beer. And then one year, Doug decided to get a few pigs, and through a series of funny circumstances, we decided we were going to butcher them at Doug's farm, and kind of just jumped in with both feet and really never looked back. We always did it with our two families and then usually a couple other families. And we turned it into an event, almost like a party every year. And it turned into something we really just loved doing. And our calendars revolved around it. And every time we did it, we tried to get better and better. And then the people that we brought in to help and to be a part of it, we ended up getting in with some people that really thought what we were doing was great, and they wanted us to start teaching it to people they knew. And then from there, the teaching part of it just sort of snowballed, and we just kept going.
Awesome.
So at this point, do you spend more time butchering or teaching, or how does that look for you sort of on your day-to-day?
It is one and the same for us anymore. It's been a very long time since Doug and I butchered something without other people there that we were teaching. So we've just kind of turned it into our practice. If we're doing it, we find ways to have people there and show them what we're doing. And we also like having the company. Like, it's never been something that we wanted to trudge through. We wanted to enjoy it. And we often tell people, if you're doing it in a way that you enjoy it, you're going to keep on doing it. It doesn't feel like work when you have other people there and you get other people excited about being there. So on a day-to-day thing, we spend a lot of time here just on our farm, and our weekends through the fall all the way into the spring are busy teaching workshops, either at our farm or at other farms or at festivals like you guys are hosting.
Do you guys prefer to teach it on your farm, or is it the exact same presentation when you guys do a traveling instruction?
That's a good question. I'd say it's always easier for us to do it at our farm because of the controlled variables, as well as the walk-in cooler right there. And
no doubt.
Sink to do all the cleaning, and the butcher table's already in the space, and climate control. And when we go to farms, we might be in a garage or a shed or a barn. And so those uncontrolled variables make things a little trickier, but every time we travel someplace, that's one pig that we can teach people how to butcher that I didn't have to raise.
Oh yeah, no doubt.
So which makes a difference, of course. If we're going to be doing this, 20 plus weekends a year, it's a lot easier for me to raise half a dozen hogs in the woods at a time instead of a couple dozen, which require management all the time for the designated workshops. So,
how large is your guys' farm, and do you do anything other than pigs?
Well, we probably use 14 acres of the current farm that we're on. It's a family farm in Andy's family. and it's pretty good size. I think it's just over 320 acres.
Wow.
About 200 of which is forest. And right now I have only 5 pigs until Thursday morning. And those 5 pigs are on about 9 acres of woods on a ravine, which is wonderful. And the rest of the farmland that we use is here in the barnyard, where we converted a former grade A dairy into a butcher shop, kind of a dream man cave turned butcher shop. So we really like it. We love doing workshops here for that reason.
Mm-hmm.
That's very cool. Did you guys grow up thinking you were going to be farmers, or what? Like when you were kids, what did you want to do?
I wanted to be an astronaut. That's
All
what I
right.
wanted to do.
Yeah.
No, I don't think either one of us grew up thinking we were going to farm. And to piggyback, pun intended, on what Doug was saying, when we first moved to the farm, we did do other things. We had a stint where we were raising lots of laying hens for eggs that we sold. A lot of our pigs were butchered that we sold at farmers markets. We also did meat chickens that we raised on pasture that we sold at farmers markets. But we found like the thing that gave Doug and I the most life and the farm the most money was our classes that we teach. And we found that there was a huge demand for them, way greater than I ever anticipated. And when 2020 rolled around, that increased even more. So it's been, our farm has gone through a couple of different iterations, but at this point, it's solely focused on teaching butchery to people that want to learn at a home scale. And beyond that, you know, we had a lot of other ideas for the farm. You know, we've talked about beef and different things like that, but we've gotten so busy with this work that we've just decided to stay focused on it.
Cool. When you guys go out to like a nice meal, are you ordering pork or is it beef? Like, if given your choice, what's your preferred?
It's really hard for either of us to order meat anywhere.
Yeah. Seafood is usually the choice that I pick.
Seafood default. Yeah. It's, people don't know how to cook meat. And even if you go to a really good restaurant, they're not going to be sourcing great meat, even if it's cooked well or properly. So yeah, seafood's a default for both of us, probably.
So do you guys have a proper cooking class on how to cook meat properly?
That's a good question. As it turns out, our workshops are often 4 days long. So we go from one live pig on the first morning, and it takes us 4 days to break down that whole animal and convert all of it into food. And that's not because we're slow. It's because we're value adding every step, and that includes cookery. It's really important to remind people, especially those small scale farmers and homesteaders that raise animals, that it's food they're raising. And if you don't raise it, or if you don't prepare it well, it's not a waste of time, but it's definitely a real drag. You can raise it really, really well. Great conditions, good husbandry, great practices, rotational grazing, excellently sourced feed. It could even be slaughtered and butchered thoughtfully, and you can still screw it up if you don't know how to cook it well. So we focus pretty heavily on cookery at our butchering workshops.
Awesome. What's your preferred method to cook over? Like, what are you using for a grill, or how do you cook?
Oh, we do just about everything. I mean, Doug's quite proficient at barbecue. You know, in the wintertime, I'm on a propane cook stove. But we love cooking over wood when we have the chance. We do different types of cooking too. You know, we're not afraid to throw something in the oven or in a wok, or sous vide, you know, whatever suits at the time.
I really think the sous vide is like a tool for really busy homesteaders that should not be undervalued.
Yeah, it's super valuable.
Like, $150, but you're like, but my steaks are perfect.
Yeah.
No matter what time I get into them, no matter who got out.
Yep, it is a great tool for sure.
So do you guys have other stuff that you sell with the class? Like, do you guys do aprons? Do you have a branded knife that you guys do, or somebody you work with that's a knife maker or stuff like that?
Yes, to those questions. Yeah, we actually do. We're not wearing them right now, but we have a local leathersmith make leather aprons for us that we use anytime we're butchering. In fact, there have been a couple, just a few times where we haven't had the apron on and it feels like we're naked when we're working. Because it does provide a level of aesthetic pleasure, I guess. They look very nice, but they also, because they're made out of leather, a stray knife here or there, it can withstand. And they have a sheath on them, which is really handy for us because we always have our knife on us. So we do sell our aprons. And we also have t-shirts and hats and things. And then we do have a local knife maker who's a good friend of ours that makes butchery knives for us. And at our workshops, we usually bring them along if we have any of them to sell.
Very
because
cool.
They're really high quality, really nice, high carbon knives.
Very cool.
So what was your life like before? Like if you're going to look back, like before you ended up being entrepreneurs, what was it like? And now that you've sort of gone through the journey, gone through struggle, and you're on the other side with Hand Hewn, how does it look now?
Well, that's a great question. Boy, I don't know. I think when we started, and we give this advice often to new or even wannabe homesteaders, to try not to create a business right out of the gate, but do as many things as you can, and then find the ones that you really love to do and that give you joy or are fulfilling. And then just keep doing those things until you get good enough at them that you can perhaps parlay that into either a side hustle or a business. And I don't know that many people that have, well, I don't know anyone that's done that way and regretted it. It's almost always the other way around, where you try to scale and grow because you're looking at your spreadsheets and X amount of chickens will yield Y profit, and so you just start growing your chicken business. But you might not love raising chickens, and you may not be prepared to scale. And so we really recommend to people to do things that they love until they get good enough at it to turn it into a business, which is what we did. I don't know that we ever felt entrepreneurial about it. I think it was more, it was super niche, obviously, but it wasn't because we were trying to appeal to a broader audience. We wanted to do it for ourselves and our families. And it turns out that the kind of Homestead 2.0 movement kind of threw all kinds of fuel on our fire, because a lot of folks that want to find out where their food comes from or raise it for themselves kind of start out with a sustainability mindset or frame of mind, which is not to say a poverty mindset, but the idea of thriving and eating extremely well isn't necessarily what's right in front of them. And when they find out they can have both with a little bit of knowledge and practice, that's where we come in. So our business model just completely skyrocketed, particularly because of COVID, and people moving back to the land and getting a small piece of property to raise their hens on. A few steps later, they've got prosciutto hanging in the cellar. So it's a slippery slope.
Would you say that you are better butchers or better businessmen?
I would definitely say I don't know. I don't know that we're highly proficient at either. We're pretty good at both. Maybe that's what it is. A kind of an even. We always tell people at our workshops that Doug and I, we were not trained butchers. We kind of learned all this stuff on the fly, which I think helps us, because we're not teaching people to be professional butchers. We're teaching people that they can do this in their own home, which is how we started. So in that case, I think it's beneficial that we're not trained butchers, though we have gotten pretty good at it, I will say. And on the business side of it, we've done all sorts of ridiculous business things that haven't made any sense. And we probably still continue to do them, to be honest. But we try to make it workable for our families and ourselves and our own lives. But to answer the question, I think we're okay at both, and I'm sure there's room for improvement in both of those realms, but we're passable at both.
Some of the business is actually driven by what the market wants, which is not really what we thought would happen. As Andy mentioned earlier, we don't raise beef. but the demand for a beef workshop is it's there. And so every year we do a beef workshop on our farm, and it sells out almost immediately. And so that was definitely a market-driven decision. A couple times we posted a 3-day and a 4-day workshop at our farm. One would be like 3-day basics of butchery, and the other would be more advanced charcuterie. And the 4-day advanced one sold out every single time. And we may have struggled to sell the 3-day tickets. So again, that was a market-driven decision where we just kind of listened to what people want and started weighting our business in that direction.
Can you make charcuterie like the salamis and the hard meats out of beef without pork? Is that a thing?
Yeah, I mean, they're Doug and I would argue they're not as good, but you can definitely do it for sure. I mean, there are cultures obviously that don't eat pork that still make dried meats and salamis and things, and so you can do it out of beef. Doug and I are really, really fond of pork, so we say if you eat pork, you might as well do it out of pork,
Right.
just because of the benefits that come with pork fat and aging of it.
I understand. More and more, I am meeting more and more friends who don't eat pork, so that's where that question came from. If you guys were going to jump back 5 years or even 10 years, what piece of advice would you give yourself having to do with today? Like what course, what mistakes, what different direction, or what would you tell yourself?
We haven't done everything right the whole time for sure, but we've grown so slowly that we actually haven't made too many mistakes that we would have done differently.
Nothing too terrifying.
Yeah, we maybe would have, I probably would have paid the money to get air conditioning in our pickup truck fixed. That's up there.
Hey, I know somebody that needs that.
I approve. Yeah. Oh wow, I got fireworks on that one.
That's one of them. We have a charming, probably 90-year-old outhouse here on the farm. That was the original bathroom to the farm when Andy's grandparents got here in 1950. And to this day, that is the bathroom that we offer our guests that are here. And so we maybe could have
worked on infrastructure a little bit earlier,
things around to make sure a bathroom on facility was going to happen sooner than now. But that's about it, really. I would not have changed much.
The only thing I would add is maybe we should have started video and YouTube sort of content earlier. And we have a tiny bit up now, and we always talk about how we need to do more of it because people ask about it all the time. And if we would have started that earlier, especially again prior to COVID, if we would have had stuff going then, it would have been more lucrative as far as finances go. It would have been a pain for us and our families, but it would have been a little bit more money in our pocket, I suppose. And it would be great content for people to utilize.
So I don't know if you guys, I'm sure you know, but you guys are like ridiculously famous. You have an enormous footprint on social media, but a very small portion of that is your actual content. But when I look at, I've watched your videos for a long time. And when I looked you up to see what your follower and fan base was or subscriber base, you guys are everywhere on social media, but it's not yours, man. You are all over the place on enormous channels. So like you don't even have to do your own content.
That's equal parts strategy and laziness. We no doubt took advantage of the free advertising early on. There were several prominent YouTubers that had to their farms or homesteads to do workshops. And we felt that really early, I'm talking 7 years ago, we were already all over YouTube for those interested in butchery or whole hog butchering. And we had naively assumed that we had tapped the market, that maybe all the homesteaders in the US already know about us because we're on these half a dozen channels, and the market is now probably saturated. We didn't know that community was going to grow 20-fold in that window of time. So we whiffed on that one.
I love watching the community grow because like it seems like every year another batch of up and coming homesteaders arrive. and they have no idea who Joel Salatin is, for example.
Sure.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh yeah, we got to connect a little better, guys.
Yeah, it's difficult. There's so much content out there for people to sort of consume, and we've noticed the new homesteaders, they're almost like overwhelmed with just information, and it's just I can't imagine starting now. When we started butchering, like, we had to look in actual books for a lot of the information. We didn't have like the YouTube content. I mean, there may have been a little bit, but there was not anything worthwhile at that point. So I can't imagine coming into it now, because you can just spend all your days watching content, which
and do
it's
nothing.
cool that it's there, but it's also a detriment because you get overwhelmed with it, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a point where you have to choose your way on something.
Yeah.
Or stop watching and actually do something.
It was easier to do that when you didn't have all the options, though, because I started like 17 years ago with chickens, and all I had was books and Backyard Chickens forum, where I just got yelled at for every decision I made, so I didn't spend any time there.
You still get yelled at for it if you.
I don't go there anymore because I'm tired. I was like, nope.
Yeah. So can a kitchen be a butcher shop, and what would the real difference be? How much room? What's the minimum to actually have a proper butcher shop for a homeowner or a guy with a small hobby farm?
Yeah, good question. I think, unfortunately, the most important component is where you live in the country. If you're in the South and you can't rely on a cold winter to have that carcass hanging, whether it's a beef or a goat, a deer or a pig, if there's no place for it to be hanging while you butcher each part of it, then all of that needs to be in your home. And that's a tough one. Generally speaking, we would tell you need a decent cutting surface, which for us is always going to be wood, butcher block, and a decently sharp knife, or a knife that you can sharpen. Except for that, all of butchery can be done with the crudest implements and setup. But having a place to hang it matters a ton. Because if you have a walk-in cooler, say, then you short circuit that problem, and you bring in one half at a time, and you cut off a primal, and you hang the rest of that half back in the cooler, and then you work on one primal at a time. And in that case, it's basically like you're breaking down a large roast for your meal prep. It is not an overwhelming proposition when you break it down one piece at a time. And that's, again, with a walk-in cooler or proper climate control, or just a decent winter. Except for that, people are generally always going to have less bins and containers than they're going to need. You can never have too many containers. As you begin to break things down, especially with a pig, you're going to have a container that's going to be rendered lard. You're going to have a container that's going to be cuts that need to be packaged and put away. You're going to need a container for bones if you want to make broth or stock. You're going to need a container for the ground meat, which is going to become sausage or ground pork. And all along the way, you're going to be dirtying dishes that you are probably not prepared for. And then the other, lastly, is a decent means of packaging, whether that's a vacuum sealer or cellophane and wax-sided butcher paper. Those very simple basics will get you going.
I take it you guys use like the Vacmaster machines?
We do today, but that we used cellophane and butcher paper for probably 10 years. And intermittently, we would use a food saver while doing the wrapping method. And then during COVID, we finally bit the bullet and bought a chamber vac, which has been a game changer for us. But we also know it's a pretty big investment for the hobbyist.
Which one did you guys get?
The 320.
Yeah, the 320. It's a good size Vacmaster, but it's not commercial grade just yet. It only has one seal bar instead of two, but we can fit like an 8 to 10 pound roast in it at a time. And for our purposes, that matters because we'll often cure in a vacuum bag, and that will include like an entire ham or an entire front shoulder. And so that size actually works out for us.
So do the words food saver jail mean anything to you?
Food saver jail?
Yeah.
No. I mean, we actually joke
it.
About food savers, but
yeah,
go
that's
ahead.
what we call it when it overheats and it won't turn back on.
Yeah.
Yeah, so when we did the food saver method, we always had 2 food savers, and then we'd have to go back and forth. While the one cooled down, we'd use the other one.
Yeah.
And we have one that we always tell people expect for it to fail, because it will at some point. But we have one we've had for 8 years, and we're waiting for the thing to die, but it just keeps going. So we're actually impressed with this one we have, because it's kind of our traveling vac sealer if we need it. But along the Vacmaster thing too, we try to ride a fine edge when it comes to like equipment, because most of the time we're going to other people's farms, and we like to have the best equipment, but we know not everyone has that, and the people that we're teaching might not have the money to buy a new grinder and a new vac sealer and build a walk-in cooler. So that's kind of where I was saying earlier, like we just taught ourselves this, so we know what these things cost, and it's not small amounts of money in some cases. So
sure,
we do try to make sure that we tell people they don't have to have all these products. Like the Vacmaster, we love the thing. It's amazing, but we've butchered plenty of pigs without a vacuum sealer or a Vacmaster or even a food saver. So it's all doable without those tools, but like anything, sometimes the tools do help the job go a little bit better.
What's the max hanging temperature that's acceptable?
Oh, good question. So for anything food safety related, if it's a raw meat product, it needs to be under 40 degrees.
Okay.
Under 40. And if it's freezing, if it's below 32, that's fine. It can freeze. It can freeze solid. But you'll want to let it thaw a little bit before you butcher it.
Okay.
Otherwise, you're liable to hurt yourself.
And then for a walk-in cooler, ideally, what do we want? What's the minimum that we should be looking at for something like that? Or what would you guys consider for what you're doing to be the minimum size?
Sure. You mean it's all size, like square footage. So I would think a 6x8 is a really good size walk-in cooler that's not overwhelmingly large.
Okay.
Now would be a good time to tell your listeners, if they're not familiar with Coolbot.
That was my next one.
Yeah.
That Coolbot or storeitcold.com. Follow our affiliate link. Storeitcold.com is Coolbot's website. Coolbot is a marvelous little invention that allows you to take a small insulated space and bring the temperature down to 36, 37, 38 degrees with a conventional window air conditioning unit. You don't need a commercial compressor, evaporators, condensers, all of that stuff. You just need an air conditioning unit. And so we advise people regularly, if they have a small homestead or even farm that has outbuildings, that you can take a corner of an outbuilding that already has electric run to it, already has a foundation and a roof over it, insulate one of the corners and put it in an air conditioning unit. And then you can have cold storage that actually is extremely efficient. It's not prohibitively expensive to run a Coolbot 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. But if you had to, you could just turn it off when you don't need it.
Any preference as to 110 or 220 on that unit that we're going to use, and why?
Yeah, so on Coolbot's website, they have anticipated every single question like that. How big to build your box, what size, or the thickness of your walls, R value, the BTU rating of the AC unit, absolutely everything. For us, we bought the biggest AC unit that you can buy. It's a 24,500 BTU made by LG, and it is a 220. But right next to our walk-in cooler is our aging chamber, and it has a smaller air conditioning unit, also Coolbot run, with 110. So it's either one.
How long might we have stuff in the aging chamber for?
Ooh, that's a good question. That's proprietary.
Ever?
Yeah, we have some. I was looking the other day. We have a couple hams that are 2 years old now.
Okay.
Our situation is different slightly. Our hams, like our larger prosciutto, what people would know as prosciutto, or in Tennessee they might call them country hams.
Yeah.
Similar, but not exactly the same. Those products, once they get to a certain point in aging, are really they're buffered by a bunch of other things. So a lot of the big hams that we have, once they're to about a year, year and a half, we actually take them out of the aging chamber and just hang them in our butcher shop.
Okay.
So we have a couple in our butcher shop. Well, there's one that's 5 years old now, I think, because they get to a point and how you treat them that they don't really need as much tender care, and the environment they're hung in isn't as important as early on. But, we hang, if we're making salamis, depending on the diameter of the salami, we might have a salami in there for 2 weeks and it might be done. Whereas other products, if they're larger, they take a little bit longer to dry out and mature. So it's anywhere from 2 weeks to 2 years. It just depends on the product we're making.
And does the aging chamber basically look like a walk-in cooler?
I mean, it's very similar. It doesn't have to hold as cold of temperatures. It only has to stay about 50 degrees.
Okay.
And ours specifically has half of a concrete wall on one side. So in the wintertime, it gets down in the 30s just on its own because we don't heat that space.
Got it.
So it fluctuates anywhere between, 35 and 55 degrees most of the year. But then you also want it to be humid. And we're basically mimicking what like a cave would be. Mm-hmm. So 50 degrees, 75 to 80% humidity. That allows the mussels to dry out slowly over time so they don't harden on the outside and trap all the moisture inside.
Does light affect that at all?
Light is a factor, but it's mainly when it comes to the fat. So UV light can make fats go rancid. Okay. So we do have a light in that curing chamber, but we keep it off most of the time. Cool. Just to keep the light away from the fat as much as possible. But any of that external rancidity, just if it does happen, you just trim it off. It's not.
Got it.
It becomes chicken or dog feed.
So Bob wants to know what the temperature of your butcher shop is, where you're hanging some hams that are ready to be out of the cooling chamber.
Oh, on a day like today, 65 to 70 degrees. Yeah, it's just like a normal. I mean, we have a little mini split in there, so it's whatever temperature we want it to be, but it's usually 65 to 70. In the winter, it probably gets a little bit colder.
Got it. Bob also says, if money is available, what budget would you spend on equipment for the ideal setup?
Wow, that's a great question, Bob. If money is available,
$100 million. Oh.
Well, let's take that. Let's take that even a step further. What's the minimum we could do ideally, and what would we add to that if we were going to build this out for well, you've seen Bob's setup, right? So let's say Prepper Homestead.
Have we seen Bob's setup? We haven't seen Bob's setup.
No, you've been to his neighbor. You've been to the farm.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
So if you're starting from scratch, like in a pole barn that's got a blank slate, is that what we're talking about?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
If you buy the 4x6 walk-in unit from Coolbot, you can buy the actual box. You don't have to build it yourself. Mm-hmm. You can, but you can buy the box from them also. You're looking at about $4,500 for that box. And then another, we'll just shoot high and say $1,000 for the window air conditioner and the Coolbot. Okay. Mm-hmm. And then you're going to need, in addition to your butcher tables, which I would recommend to people to either have made or repurposed butcher block, or we point people in the direction of bowling alleys that have closed, and then they liquidate all of the front section of that butcher or that bowling alley is actually hard maple. That's why all the bowling balls don't make dings and divots in the wood. So you can get a really economical butcher block surface for that. And then you're looking at only a few inputs beyond that. One would be the grinder. That's probably your most important piece of equipment. There are a lot of other pieces of equipment, but a grinder, we warn people, if you go cheap on a grinder, you'll regret it. You'll never regret getting too powerful a grinder. You'll just never say, my grinder is too strong. You'll only wish you had a stronger one. So a decent grinder, even from Cabela's, you're looking at about $800. And that's probably entry level for a decent grinder. And then up from there, a food saver would be your first move, and then up to a chamber vac when you have been able to justify it.
Anywhere from like 200 to 1,200, depending on what you're getting.
Yep. And then even before you have a meat slicer or a buffalo chopper or any of the other fancy meat processing equipment like a bandsaw, I would recommend a sausage stuffer, because even if you don't stuffed link sausages, you're going to have ground products, whether it's ground beef or ground pork. And when you package those products, if you fill that sausage stuffing tube with that ground meat, you can crank directly into the bags that are going to get vacuum sealed. And it is exponentially faster and easier and more enjoyable than trying to hand fill ground meat into Ziploc bags or anything else. So in that order, you'll want your space with your cold storage, your butcher block table, your grinder, and then your stuffer, and a vacuum sealer of some kind.
And this, I mean, it's probably kind of goes without saying, but you want a big sink if you have the option with a lot of available hot water, because cleaning grinder equipment when you run fat through it with cold water is not really the most fun thing to do. So having a way to clean everything in the shop is super valuable. And one other thing that is not absolutely necessary, but when Doug and I started, it was one of the things that we loved the most, was just a way to cook meat very quickly right next to us. So when we were learning, one of the most fun, we talked about how we always made beer. So we always had beer there. So we were drinking beer, and you'd cut a chunk of meat that was like, well, this looks like it'd be delicious. Let's try it. So we always had a skillet next to us with a little propane burner and some butter and salt and pepper. So we were always throwing things on to cook them, figuring out, well, is this going to be better rare or medium rare? Or is this something we found out some things need to be cooked slower under wet heat? So frying them wasn't very good. And that's just one of those like quality of the experience sort of things that doesn't seem like a necessity, but in some ways it is a necessity, because when you're doing this in a butcher shop, you're going to get hungry, you're going to get thirsty. You might as well have a good way to eat while you're there. And if you're cutting up all this meat, you have all this raw, excellent product. You might as well find a way to cook it while you're there too.
Another side note before we move on from the butcher shop space is I think we got up to close to $10,000 just now, which is a pretty sizable investment. However, I would remind folks that it's only a butcher shop when you're butchering in it. The rest of the time, it's your outdoor kitchen or your country kitchen, where you can do all of your canning and preserving,
any
and
food processing,
all of your storage, whether it's extra, like, because you now have a walk-in cooler for cold storage. So all of your extra eggs or dairy, all your extra milk, all your veg that you haven't gotten to yet from the garden, the deer that you drop in September, like whatever it is, you have this space now to do all of your food prep and canning and preserving. And for us, it's actually our default party host location, because while he has a very nice home and so do I, hosting in the butcher shop is a breeze. And if you stay up until no one wants to clean up at the end of the night, that's fine. You get around to it when you can, and you didn't trash the kitchen doing it.
Yep.
So it's a multi-use facility for sure.
Would you smooth concrete finish, leave it raw, epoxy, drain in the middle? Is you guys, if you were building it from the beginning?
So many good questions. Yeah. I love this.
Those are all good questions. We had a sealed concrete floor with a floor drain in what was a grade A dairy, but I actually etched the sealant off the floor with muriatic acid so that I could put 2-part epoxy down.
Okay.
So I put a couple coats of epoxy, and that has a lot to do with cleanability, but more to do with aesthetic. And when I say aesthetic, I don't just mean, wow, this place looks really nice. it feels like a place that good food can be made.
Mm-hmm.
And even if that floor is sealed well, it still can stain, and it gets yucky. It feels like you're in a garage, and it doesn't feel like excellent food can be made in this space in the same way that the epoxy does.
Did you nail it on the first time with the color, or do you wish you'd have went with a different color for that floor?
No, I think the color's great.
Yeah, we went with like a charcoal,
Okay.
a charcoal color. So it was the right move. All the walls are white, the floor is charcoal, and then we have a lot of natural wood in the space from our butcher block surfaces, as well as our walk-in cooler is also wood. It's from the 40s.
Got it.
So a scrap studying comment here from the audience is you could buy a used walk-in cooler for a few $100s. It doesn't have a working compressor and put a Coolbot in it. I've also come across a walk-in cooler in panels in a dumpster.
They latch together.
Was upgrading. So you can get those insulated panels for free. If you want it to be a freezer, you talk to our guy, Tad Fuller, about what you need to do for that. So, because he's done that before. That's who I talked to when we were starting to make plans here for a walk-in cooler and freezer.
Yep. So our walk-in in Ohio, I think this is unique. I know there are a number of states like this, but in Ohio, we have what are called beer drive-throughs, where you, instead of going through fast food, you go through a building full of coolers, and you can just get your beer as you drive through. And there was one of those not far from us that someone bought, and they were going to turn it into a warehouse space. And so they liquidated all of the walk-in coolers that were in it. And we bought a 8x8.
I think it's 10.
It's 10 by 10. A 10 by 10 walk-in cooler. It's all wood clad inside and out from the 1940s. And it came with a working compressor and condenser and evaporator coils and all of that stuff. And we ripped all of it out so that we just had a nice insulated box, as your commenter suggested. And then cut a square that was the right size for our air conditioning unit, and we were off to the races. So that is a great idea. Since I installed that one, about an hour from here, the farm where we're at, a Burger King was going out of business. And so for $300, by the way, I bought that first cooler for $125.
Yeah,
that's what we paid for the walk-in cooler. For $300, I went to an old Burger King that was just closed, and I won that at auction and got a walk-in cooler freezer combo that I just had to disassemble and bring to the farm. So yes, you can buy the box, whether consignment, liquidation, auction, or build, whatever is the most efficient and makes sense for you.
How much?
Yeah, our whole butcher shop build has taken years, and there are not many things that we bought new. I mean, a very few. I mean, even our Vacmaster we bought used, our grinder, like our butcher tables. Yeah, so the numbers Doug was talking about when you're building out a butcher shop, if you have the time to make that list and then scavenge and find auctions, flea markets, anything, you can do it for, half the numbers Doug was talking about. But the trade-off is the time that it's going to take to source all those things. But
you can do it cheap and slow, or spend the money and get it done now.
Yep.
Yeah, with the money, a semi-truck brings it to you.
Exactly.
That's correct.
Yep.
Is Hobart kind of the gold standard still? Is that for commercial equipment?
Yeah, it's a lot for commercial stuff. We have one piece of Hobart equipment that most people would never even consider buying at their shop. It's called a buffalo chopper, which you do not need. But like home use, there's a couple companies that make really good products. The Cabela's branded stuff is actually usually pretty good. LEM, Weston. There's the Made with Meat people.
Even Hakka.
Yeah, I mean, we have a sausage stuffer by some Chinese company called Hakka that's actually been great up to this point. So Hobart is nice. They make nice equipment, but that's usually on the higher end and more geared towards production facilities for the most part.
Cautionary tale, though, for those that would find a piece of Hobart equipment at auction or consignment, and they're everywhere.
Yeah.
The reason that they're being liquidated is not because they don't work anymore. They probably work really well. They probably need a part replaced on them, that costs almost as much as buying a new item.
I got it.
So if you were to find, say, a Hobart meat slicer, for $250, which you can do probably any day of the week, wherever you're at on Facebook Marketplace, you can get a Hobart meat slicer. I would suggest you look up the replacement value of that blade before you buy that slicer, because if the replacement value is $800, that $200 slicer is not quite the bargain you thought it was.
What does a buffalo chopper do?
Oh, so it's also called a bowl chopper. It's this huge stainless steel bowl that's got a cover that goes over it, and the bowl turns basically clockwise, and there are blades in the back of it that chop as the material runs underneath it. So you can in real time watch the coarseness of things that are being chopped. Doug and I love it when we make salami, because you can adjust the chopping and how much it's chopped, so you can give it this cool hand cut look. But it's also great if you want to make hot dogs, because you keep running it and you can create emulsified products. So we also use it for things like hot dogs and liverwurst and pâtés, where you want something smooth, you just keep running it.
Got it.
Yeah. I mean, it's a cool tool, but completely unnecessary for the home user. We actually got it on a fluke. It's not something you need by any means.
So Bob, Bob, while you're ordering that buffalo chopper, just have one sent over here too.
Yeah.
Hey, Bob wants to know, do you want a mixer grinder, or do you want them to be separate pieces?
I'm assuming, is he talking about like I'm not sure. Like, so that some people have like these paddle mixers that you use for sausage. I'm wondering if that's what he's asking, or something else, like a KitchenAid mixer. I'm not sure exactly what he's saying, but sometimes you have like a crank.
Yeah. The KitchenAid's a bad idea. Don't do it. Not worth it. Just ask me how I know that.
Yeah. Yeah. So if you're making a lot of product that's ground, that's going to be seasoned, and you're making a lot of it like salamis and sausages, a mixer to do that mixing for you is great. We don't actually use one because when we're butchering pigs, it's usually one at a time, and there's not enough. We don't grind the whole pig, so there's not enough ground product that's ever really justified us buying a mixer. We just do it by hand. But if you're doing a lot of it, those mixers are handy.
And my grandpa used to use his grinder to mix breakfast sausage. So he would sprinkle by weight all of the spices on there and then run it through the grinder 2 or 3 times.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's another way to do it. The only problem with the grinder is it does add a certain amount of heat, which you don't. No,
this was 50
years hand grinder.
Ago. Yeah. Totally different world. But
yes. Right.
Sorry, when I pop in with grandpa stories, I'm older than I look, I guess, but yeah.
Oh no, yeah. My grandparents who lived at this farm, their hand crank grinder is still down at the house, and then granddad hooked one up to an electric motor, when they got tired of that. So it's still a hand crank, but it's on a wheel. So yeah, those things always, as a child, I remember seeing those running and thinking someone's going to get hurt.
So you're doing a class
as a child.
Yeah, exactly. You're doing a class right before Self-Reliance Festival, which is a 2-day version of your 4-day class. Right. And I understand we will be scalding the pig. And the first question we have here is what do you use pork skins for? It's
like the rest of the pig. It's food, which most people in America aren't really used to unless you talk about pork rinds. You buy a bag of pork rinds at your local gas station. Those are just pig's skin that has been fried and puffed up. So if you like pork rinds and you scald and scrape your pig, you can make a lot of pork rinds. We make another dish. I mean, everything I'm going to say is going to be food-based. It's just different ways to make food. But we make a dish called geta, which I think Bob has had, which is amazing, which actually relies heavily on the skin to help hold it together because of all the gelatin, collagen, and then into gelatin that you get from the skin. But we also use it when we're making prosciutto. I was talking about hanging the prosciutto out in our butcher shop. If those did not have the skin on them, we wouldn't do that, because that skin is a really excellent protective barrier that helps buffer the environment between that and the meat inside. And then sometimes it's like a practical thing. Sometimes if you have like pork ribs and you've sawn through the ribs and you have little shards of bone, and you put it into a Vacmaster, that seal is going to break. So we use pieces of pig skin over top of it as like a bone pad to protect things if we have extra skin there. When we're making our bacon, we keep the skin on, and the skin stays on the bacon the whole time until after it's smoked, and then we take the skin off, and then we have this whole piece of smoked skin that can go in soups and stews and anything like that to add a smoky element that might not even have been smoked, prior or anything else. So you have that option in stock. Yeah. So you can, even if you're not going to do any of those things, put the skin in your stock pot and extract all that gelatin in the form of your stock. And then anything you put that stock into, your soups, you cook your rice in it, whatever, you're adding that gelatin, which is really great nutritionally for us. So yeah, pounds and pounds and pounds of a pig are going to end up as skin, and most people just take it off and throw it out. So we feel really strongly about the skin component, which is kind of funny, but it's also been a selling point for our workshops because there's a lot of people that don't know how to scald and scrape anymore, and they think it's really hard, or they don't have the equipment to do it. But you don't need really anything. If you can build a fire outside, you have the capability to scald and scrape your own pigs.
I think a lot of people think of pork rinds and pig skins, they think out of a bag. When you have them fresh, they bring them onto the table and they're still popping. And when they're in your mouth, they pop like pop rocks. It's
excellent.
Very different.
Then you can add whatever flavors you want to it. You have, again, the whole culinary aspect is just excellent.
How much were you into the culinary aspect of things before you started butchering?
Oh, I'd say that those two things happened at the same time on the same day. The very first time we butchered our very first pig, we realized that this whole thing is food, and the possibilities are not limitless, but they are so much more variable than we could have imagined. And then when you have an entire pig to start with, you're faced with the question, what am I going to do with all of this? And so, and as it happens, unless you're Jewish or Muslim, your culture has a millennia of culinary traditions with this pig. And so we I don't want to say favor, we specialize in a lot of the European traditions, namely Italian and Spanish and French. But Asia also has a deep history with pork, and then again into the Caribbean and South America with barbecue. So it's a whole world of culinary possibilities that we didn't really even consider before we started breaking down our first pig. And then we realized that if you start with a really excellent raw ingredient in the first place, then the sky's the limit. You can go any direction you want. And so on our very first or second pig, this would have been 2010. 2010. I had a prosciutto leg hanging in my cellar. And that same year, Andy had been working on cheese making, and he had made a hard Parmesan. And a year later, during a butchering weekend, the same weekend, a year later, we cut into that 1-year-old prosciutto leg and that 1-year-old aged cheese. And we never looked back. That was the beginning of the whole rest of our life. We just knew right then that this was something that money cannot buy, something we couldn't find anywhere. And it was better than we could have dreamed, quite frankly. And we did it ourselves with a very little knowledge at that time.
Yeah.
And so we learned that sharpening some of those skills and practices was going to be fruitful. And that's what we did for a number of years before we turned it into a business. So yeah, the culinary and the butchery always went hand in hand.
Yep. They've just grown together.
Have you ever had an abject failure on one of your curing projects? And did it mean that the whole thing was ruined, or did it mean that you had something you didn't intend to make?
Well, I don't know that I would call them abject failures, but when we first started, when you have a pig that you've butchered, you want to make bacon, which is kind of obvious to any, American that I know. Pork belly is great and everything, but people want to make bacon when they butcher their first pig. And we did make bacon, but our methods at the beginning were not nearly as refined as they are now, or like well thought out. And so, and this happens to a lot of people, we oversalted our bacon. And so you get this chunk of what you think is bacon, and it's going to be great, and you fry it up in the skillet, and you can't even eat it. Like, you have to spit it out. It's so salty. Now, we learned to adjust in that specific case, like ways to manage that. But we hated the fact that, like, because we were only butchering one pig for each of our families, or even maybe I only had a half the first year. It's like, if you ruin half of the bacon or all the bacon, it just really was a super downer. But we've had other cures that like don't taste as good as we want, or like there are chances where you can get like off flavors and things, which we've had. I'm trying to think if we've had anything like complete failure though. We've had a few things we didn't want to eat, but then we just put it in a box in our butcher shop we call the drunk box. And then when people come over that maybe have had too much to drink, or if people are drinking too much, was bring all the drunk box stuff out and just let them eat as much cured meat as they want. And at that point, they don't care. They think it's awesome. It's just finding the right time and place,
Have you guys ever messed with a salt box? Like, do you guys do that?
We may have early on. We never built a salt box. Did we? We may have covered things in salt early on. That is, there's a whole spiel we give about the whole curing thing and the usage of salt and all that, which we'll talk about at the workshop we're doing down there with you all. But in the past, when people were curing meat, they didn't have all the information that we have now about how to do it as well as we do. So like country ham, and I apologize ahead of time. Doug and I are not huge country ham lovers, but we didn't grow up in Tennessee or Kentucky or Virginia.
I don't think people in Tennessee are huge country ham lovers.
No, well, they're very, very salty, and they're still made that way, even though people know that they could make them without making them that salty. But it's a traditional holdover. People are used to having that flavor, that saltiness. They're used to either boiling it or soaking it or putting it with other things. So it's a traditional dish that's supposed to be oversalted now. But Doug and I did not grow up that way, and we just think that's preposterous. And we know that we can make these dishes or these products without oversalting them, just with a little bit of math and a scale. And people say, well, that's not how the old timers did it. Well, the old timers didn't have digital scales, and they didn't know the salt percentages to use. And our argument,
refrigeration.
Yeah.
And so they were preserving meat by burying it in salt so that it would not ever rot or decompose. Even in the August in the South, this piece of meat was still preserved. And there's some validity to that. But if that same piece of meat had 1/3 the amount of salt applied, we know today that it would still be preserved and palatable. It would be delightful, in fact. And that's where food science and the culinary world kind of work together.
So that was my question. That's where.
So you can do it that way, but we usually don't. That's the short answer.
So that's where I was going. Like, collapse of society, no more electricity. You're telling me you guys can do a better way than the salt box?
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome.
And even now, even if we didn't have a scale, Doug and I have done it enough that we would be able to eyeball very closely to what we need. Like Doug said, 1/3 in salt box. If you were comparing like a ham that we were putting in a salt box to the salt we would use the way we do it, it's way less than 1/3. It's probably like 1/10 of the salt. So there's also the aspect of like, in an apocalyptic situation, salt is going to be valuable. You're not going to want to bury hams in salt. If you know how to make it with 1/10 of, the amount of salt, that's probably a better option.
So what's your favorite cracker to stack with your meat and cheese?
Bob is no
I'm
longer
messing with
invited.
you.
Lunchable.
Yeah.
Yeah, Bob's canceled.
Yeah. Well, no, he's providing crackers on Friday night, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
Oh,
thank-
okay.
thank
All right.
goodness.
You know,
Yeah.
there's a lot of crackers. We usually like crackers that have that are just like salt. You know, you don't need a lot of flair on the cracker. You know, you don't need like garlic, rosemary, cheddar crackers or things like that.
I'm a fan of the cheese and meat only stack without the cracker.
Yeah, also a good option.
Yeah.
So back real quick to the floor with the drain. I assume you guys are on septic and not city.
Correct.
Yes.
What's the concern with the grease pass through to the septic system? Have you guys had an issue? Are you a grease trap or?
Very good question. We should definitely have a grease trap. That's a good idea.
But we don't.
We don't. But we really ought.
That's
we really
where I'm
ought
at.
to.
Yeah,
we really ought to. We will, though. We crank our hot water heater up as high as it will go. So it's a residential hot water heater, but it's coming out at I think 133 degrees out of the tap. It'll burn you in the blink of an eye. But we use it for our scalding drum when we scald, and then we use it for all of our washing dishes. And that volume of screaming hot water, I think, keeps the drains cleaned.
Cool.
And we had the septic pumped once since we've been here. And the grease amount in there wasn't egregious, I don't think.
We put in a gray water system here for that reason, because I was getting, even with hot water, I was getting grease issues in my septic.
Yeah. And this septic, to be also transparent, this septic is completely separate from our houses. It is just for this butcher shop because it was set up as a dairy. So we kind of fell into a good situation. So we don't have a bathroom hooked up to it. It's just the water from our sinks pretty much that goes there.
And a little bit of diligence goes a long way. And this goes to the home cook as well. Both husband and wife need to know it's okay to take the napkin or paper towel and wipe the fat off of the dish or the grinder part or whatever,
pan and pour it out,
and then throw that in the trash. Do not pour that bacon grease or whatever down your drain. You're just borrowing trouble. And so we, as a practice, we will always wipe with paper towels. We'll wipe fat off of anything that's visible before we wash it.
Yeah, paper towels are much.
I put it out for the dog. Let them take care of it first.
Paper towels are much cheaper than field lines.
They are.
Correct.
Okay, question. Any opinion on the equipment, grinders and stuffers from the sausage maker? Looks like most of their stuff is US made.
We've used sausage maker stuffers that have been fine. I don't know what grinders they sell. But we've purchased things from the sausage maker, like stuffing or casings and things. I haven't heard anything bad. I don't know that we have firsthand knowledge of their grinders, but if you're running a company like Sausage Maker and you're not selling a good grinder, then you shouldn't be in business. So I'm assuming that what they're running is probably pretty good.
Are there any unusual or uncommon ingredients that maybe you discovered unexpectedly that were awesome in a recipe for a cured meat or for some sausage you're trying to make?
What a great question. Yeah, we did. We had one in particular, and it was pink peppercorns. Which are not in the same pepper family as the black and white peppercorns. But we had a combination with pink peppercorns and Szechuan peppers. And those two together were really, really nice.
We did a pink and black
salami too. And then we did a salami that we called Noir et Rose because it sounds fancier than just pink and black. But it was a pink peppercorn and black peppercorn salami that we did. Also very, very nice. Any other? In
Europe, it's not that uncommon, but we use juniper berries a lot, which many people don't use, but juniper berries are really nice. We don't actually get that off the wall. You don't really need to. There's so many good things off of what is pretty common.
I've seen the enormous boards and table spreads you guys put out at these events.
Yeah.
Is all of that coming from your own? Are you creating all of that product, or are you sourcing some of it from other sources?
All the cured meats on those boards are things we've made.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. So we have a workshop this weekend coming up, which is our 4-day charcuterie workshop. And we're going to be butchering a 500-pound pig, I think. It's a really big one, which we only usually do at our own farm because we have the means to deal with it. So, and most of this pig is going to be cured in some way. And some of those cured cuts we're not going to see for 2-3 years. And then some of them, like the salamis, they'll be turned into a usable product within a couple months. So we have a rotation of cured meats from different pigs. And once we get through one, we go on to another. That's taken a long time for us to build up, like the really solid inventory that we have that we can share with people. At first, we were really cautious with how much we shared because we didn't have a ton of it. But anymore, we'll tell people, if you want us to slice something else, let us know. Because in most cases, we have plenty of it.
It's not common knowledge, I think, even though we say it all the time, that we don't sell our products. We do not sell our charcuterie products. Nothing that we do either here or when we travel is under inspection. So there is no veterinarian there to inspect the animal to make sure that it's healthy before it's slaughtered or after it's slaughtered. And the facilities that we're working in are not inspected facilities. And so nothing that we make is ever sold as a product. Instead, it's a marketing opportunity for us because people get a good idea that they're going to get to enjoy some of it if they come to our workshops. But because we don't sell it, we can be very generous in sharing them, which is why the spreads have gotten pretty elaborate over the years, because we just continue. If you come to one of our workshops, you are going to be putting away this coming weekend, for example, hundreds of pounds of charcuterie that you are not going to enjoy, but someone else will later. You will be enjoying the fruits of someone else's labor from 2019, 20, 21.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think everybody here can agree that it is asinine that you can give that away, but can't sell it without the inspection. We're all on board.
Well, it's way less safe, John, if somebody pays money for it. That instantly makes it not safe.
Well, to be honest, we could sell our products if we wanted to. We have worked with inspectors and had them come to the farm and walk through our butcher shop and given them a whole rundown of what that business enterprise would look like. But it looks and sounds to Andy and I a little bit too much like a job, and that's not what we're in this for. So
got it.
Inventory, we would sell out. I mean, you have to
we don't do
understand the quality of the product that we make. You cannot find in the United States, and the people that know that. And if we were to sell our product, it would be gone as soon as it was available, and then that means we would be forced, before we even open our doors, to scale up in a way that would either be unsustainable for us as a farming practice, or we would be sourcing products that we didn't raise and that we can't really stand by. And,
got it.
And we would be working all the time to satisfy the public.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a good time to talk about what you're doing April 4th and 5th at Self-Reliance Festival. I'm showing on the screen right now, selfreliancefestival.com/workshops. This is where all the workshops are. And you can see they'll be here April 4th and 5th, pig processing and curing. Can you tell us a little bit about what's happening in the class? The product is right here.
Yeah, so the class that we're offering there is we've changed it a little bit so that we can do some of the butchering and get to a lot of the curing aspects, because that's what a lot of people really come for. So on day one, on the 4th, we're going to be killing a pig. So they'll see that whole process. We're going to scald the pig, which a lot of people have never done before. And then the way we break it down after that is we're actually going to be butchering the pig. A lot of it, we're going to be butchering what they call hot boning, which is a little bit, might not be the best thing to Google, but it's basically cutting up the pig as it right after it's been killed, basically. So we're going to scald and scrape it, eviscerate the animal, and we'll talk about utilizing the organs and all of that. But then we're going to start breaking the pig down on day one while it's still warm to get it in more manageable pieces so that we can get into the talking about curing. So we're going to speed up a little bit of the butchering process just so that we can get the next day into some of the ins and outs of curing at home, which is what a lot of people really want to be informed by. So a lot of our decisions on day one, which we'll talk about in the class, a lot of the decisions we make in day one are in service of curing the pork on day two.
Yeah, it seems like if you know you're going to make bacon and you know you leave the skin on for that, that impacts if you skin the animal or how you skin the animal.
Right.
So if you don't know that going in, then the steps you take on day one would be a big issue. And then you're doing a charcuterie platter for us to try on
the
Friday
night. Yes.
Yeah. So that's going to be for everybody who takes the class. Plus, if you are a VIP pass holder, there's a reception on Friday night with the big old meat platter. And it's well worth it to get there Friday to get to try some of these things. You're going to be tasting things that you can't buy. Like they've just told you can't buy them.
Yeah.
And not only can you not buy them from these guys, but I'm sure that the variety of what you have, you can't necessarily find easily.
It's funny because you can find products that are called the same thing, but they're not the same.
They're not what they say they are.
Because we can do things with the way we do it that the industry cannot do. So like the pig that we're going to be killing for our upcoming workshop here at our farm is how old? 3?
Oh, yeah, at least. Yeah.
So the pig's 3 or 4 years old, which financially does not make sense on an industrial scale at all. But a 4-year-old pig yields cured meat products that are highly superior to what you would get out of a 6-month-old pig, which is what most of the industry in America, the industry standard is. That's why European meats often taste better, is because they raise their pigs longer. Most pigs that are cured, like in Italy, let's say, are usually 12 to 18 months old as opposed to 6 months old. And that flavor development happens with age before the pig's ever even killed. So you can't buy meats like we produce because people aren't doing older pigs on a scale like that. So that's one of the reasons that they're better.
You had said that
find them other way.
You had said that you will have some salamis ready in 2 months from what you're doing. So I think you said salami. So at that 2-month salami at 2 years, does that become a better quality of meat, or is there a date where that falls off at?
It's a good question. The whole muscles, as we call them, the capicolas, the prosciuttos, the culatellos, etc., those age with a far higher degree of flavor development than the salamis do. The salamis are chopped and then they're heavily spiced or seasoned and then cased before they're fermented and aged. And so they actually benefit from a fresher, younger aging than the whole muscle because of the spice profile that's going to be added. It's really nice because often we'll have like the zest of a blood orange, or we'll have orange soaked rum in the salami, and so those flavors they're more pronounced early. They don't develop as well over time, and then the meat doesn't need to break down over time like the whole muscle does.
Got it. Understood.
Okay, here's now something completely different. Do you have any experience curing sheep or lamb?
We cured a leg of lamb years ago now. What they call it, fenellar, I think.
Lancetta.
Yeah, it was, so we've done it, yes, and you can do it, but again, it's just like the beef early on. It's fine, but if you expect to cure sheep and have it taste like pork cured products, you're going to be disappointed. You just have to adjust what your expectation is. But yeah, any red meat you can cure just like you do pork, but the fat doesn't age the same way. So oftentimes you'll see cuts, especially on beef, if they're going to cure and age a cut, it's usually very lean because the beef does not age. The beef fat doesn't age well like pork fat does. The only other animal that really would age anything close to pork fat would be duck. That's really the only other one that you can really put age on, and it still gets better.
I was about to ask you about duck because I've been seeing a lot of people curing duck, and I had not been aware until recently you could do that, because with chicken, it's not really a thing.
Yeah. Right.
So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. And that's why, because duck fat and chicken fat are not the same. Again, it's why the pig wins, because pig fat is wonderful to begin with, and it just gets better with time. Whereas beef fat is waxy, and venison fat is just gross, and chicken fat is greasy, but duck fat is where it's at. It's already wonderful, and it contributes even more in time. So it's really all about the fat. If you were to preserve, and I've not done this, and I don't really advocate it, but if you were to preserve a chicken breast, if you were to complete a chicken breast in duck fat, that would be good. That would probably be very nice. Yeah. But a chicken breast in chicken fat would not be. So, and conversely too, if you were to take that duck breast and try to preserve that in chicken fat, it would not be good. Yeah. So a lot of it has to do with the superiority of the fats.
Have you ever been brought in as like a guest chef someplace?
Yeah, we have actually. We did a collab here in Ohio, and
it was with Bob's friend.
Yeah, and increasingly we are finding ourselves on the culinary school circuit, where we're brought in by culinary instructors to help teach culinary students.
Very cool. Can you guys be hired out for weddings and parties and stuff like that?
Probably not.
Like just to look good?
No, to look good and bring the food.
Just stand there in your leather apron.
Well, yeah, to bring the cured meat is tricky because it hasn't been inspected. So
got it. Understood. Yeah. Understood. So we do a butchering.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. Awesome.
I just had to highlight this comment. Drawback of duck fat is you have to have ducks. Ducks are the goats of the poultry world. I love my ducks.
I don't necessarily disagree.
I have goats too, so.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah. So I see you got a cup in your hand there. Is that coffee, tea? What are you doing?
Well, it was bourbon, since you're
okay, so that's what I was going to ask. Whiskey or bourbon?
Yeah. Now I'm finished. I'm chasing my bourbon with a LaCroix.
All right. So what's your special bourbon? Like what bourbon is actually something you don't get on a daily basis that's your favorite?
Oh, wow, that's a good one. On a daily basis. Okay, so
hold on, I'm going to interrupt for 1 second. I have to step out because my computer's about ready to die and I need to get a power cable. So
all right.
I'm going to make sure we don't cut out.
This was Woodford double oaked.
That's a good choice.
And it's a good bourbon. It's Wendell Berry's bourbon of choice for anybody that's curious for a little trivia. When we do our butchering workshops, we always start our weekend with the recitation of a poem for the hog killing by Wendell Berry and a shot of bourbon. And we've been doing that as long as we've been doing these butchering weekends. And for a long time, we would just have bullet rye. That was our kind of default when we got started. But then when we started doing this professionally, and we realized that we could put in our contract that you have to have a bottle of bourbon there for the first morning, we've been on like a rotation. We'll try not to have the same bourbon twice.
All right.
Because we do this often. And so it's actually a great big world of bourbons out there anymore. And it's growing every day. And so it's kind of fun to have a rotation instead of trying to stick with a tried and true, as it were.
So that's your rider. Awesome. That's cool.
Yeah. I don't remember seeing that rider in the contract, actually.
If it's not, I need to adjust it.
Yeah, I'll have to go back and look.
Very neat.
But Woodford Double Oak is... I learned to drink Woodford because I'm from Oregon originally, and I used to go, like, the liquor stores are overseen by the state pretty strongly. So they all had to have the same hours. And I would get my bottle of Maker's Mark every month. And the ladies were hilarious. I walked in one day and they're like giggling as if they've been getting into the product. And they were like, if you like Maker's Mark, you'll love Woodford. And it was like at that point, $2 more for the bottle. And it opened up. That's how I ended up going down the whole bourbon journey. I just love all different kinds of bourbons. So on this line, 30-Day Reviews wants to know if you still make beer.
That's a fantastic question.
Yeah. The short answer is no. The better answer is right down the road from us, there's a farm that raises Mangalitsa pigs. And they, about the same time we started our farm, they opened up a farm brewery called Woolly Pig Farm Brewery. And they make excellent German-style lagers. So we just get them one keg at a time, which is another great reason to have a walk-in cooler because they hold kegs of beer.
It's true.
So we just get kegs of beer from our friends, so we don't have to make it anymore.
And somehow it's a write-off.
Yeah.
It's weird.
It's awesome.
Yeah. So we haven't made beer in years.
That's cool. So what's the poem? What's the name of it?
For the Hog Killing.
All right.
And it's really fun. I haven't done this personally, but I bet that if you were to Google For the Hog Killing, Wendell Berry, and you were to search images, this is me just taking a stab in the dark, you will find pictures of us. You will also now find people all over the country that now carry on this tradition. It's pretty awesome. We've been planting prosciutto seeds now for quite some time. And in addition to that is this ritual of reading this poem with a slug of bourbon. It's pretty cool.
I'll bet it's become quite theatrical.
Well, it's, believe it or not,
it's often solemn.
It's the opposite of what you would think. It's very somber. And, you know, on the internet, on YouTube in particular, people have a real hard time with a shotgun and a bottle of bourbon in the same scene. It just feels reckless. But in real life, it's more of a poem and a prayer and a blessing and a kind of common denominator for all of us to start this thing together, this heavy undertaking.
Very cool.
Do you ever get to people's farms and there is like, what do you do to help people get over the mental block if it's their first time of shooting that animal? Do you ever do anything along that lines, or you just go for it?
Well, that's what the bourbon is about.
Yeah, that helps.
For one thing.
When we go, I mean, we always send a bunch of information ahead of time, and they know that the pig is going to be killed then. But what often helps is that we're there, and we've done it a bunch of times. Doug is usually the one that shoots the pig, but he always offers to the farmer the option for them to shoot it. Some of them take that option, some of them don't. Some of them would rather see, you know, us do a lot of that initial work. You know, we've had people be hesitant, and you know, some people get emotional about it because they've been raising this pig for months. But we've never run into any major pushback or reticence or anything like that I can remember. You know, because usually at that point it's been built up to the point where it's an inevitability. It's just how you deal with it, you know, with your emotions and in the practical how to do it.
We hate the killing of the animal. Like, we hate it. We don't like it at all. There's no game in it. It's not hunting. You know, it's a domesticated animal that will come up to you most of the time. Mm-hmm. And taking the life of an animal in that way it's hard. It's not fun at all. And that's again part of what the function of the poem provides, is that kind of unifying somberness of it. So yeah, we also, though, because we're not good at it, we're committed to being excellent at it, because the idea of us like wounding or maiming this creature isn't an option. And that's the other thing that people are most intimidated about, actually. If you're hunting, if you're a bow hunter, or even if you hunt with a gun, the idea of maiming the animal, like that's built into the practice. This is different. Like, people took care of this thing every day of its life. They've missed vacations or had to leave parties early to go home and feed or whatever it is. and making sure it dies well is just as important as making sure it lives well.
Do you use a captive bolt gun or something else?
We use a 410 shotgun. We have used captive bolt before, but we don't own one. Captive bolt, while it certainly has a function, its chief function is discharge in a zone that doesn't allow for firearm use. So if you had more of a suburban context that you had a pig in and you're not allowed discharging a firearm in your backyard, captive bolt would be the option there. But you have to have a pretty decent relationship with a pig to be able to press something up against its forehead and it holds still for even a millisecond.
Yeah. So do you just use a 410 slug? Is that what you guys use?
Yeah, we do.
Okay.
Yeah.
Makes sense. Okay. If I was building a processing building, any suggestions on how small is comfortable? Seems like a lot of counter space would be needed. So how small can you go?
Small. Well, we've seen people have little processing centers in like
garden sheds
or like a shipping container where they put their walk-in cooler on one end, and then the front end of the shipping container is a little processing area. Counter space is important. Doug and I, when we built out the butcher shop that we're in, we knew we were going to be hosting people, so the square footage was important just for the number of bodies. But if you're doing it just by yourself, which we don't recommend, you could get away with like a 6x6 cube, I suppose, but it wouldn't be as enjoyable as doing it in a bigger space with more people. We always tell people to do it with others, just because it's more fun. Even if the other people don't have no idea what they're doing, they're just standing there talking with you while you're working. It's better than just working by yourself.
Also, this isn't not an obvious point, but I think when I talked earlier about the location of a walk-in cooler and picking an outbuilding or the corner of an outbuilding to put that box, that also should be where your butchering space is. The idea of trying to schlep carcasses or meat lugs back and forth
We've done that.
Is not ideal. It is not ideal. And if it happens that you can butcher or process right outside of where the walk-in cooler is, then you can wheel things back and forth on carts with casters, often vertically integrated carts that you can have many tiers of bins. And that way you need less countertop space because you have things stored in the cooler and you're working on one thing at a time on the table.
What would you say the smallest space you could come into and not be miserable is for you two guys to come in with 2 or 3, 4 other people? Could we do 20 by 20 or could we do a 10 by 10?
Oh, 20 by 20 would be plenty.
Oh, heavens, yes.
Yeah.
Most people's kitchens.
Okay.
Most people's kitchens can facilitate Andy and I at a counter or a table with either spectators or people taking turns.
We've done that often, or just at someone's dining room table. 20 by 20 would be luxurious.
Yep.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Okay, well, we're getting towards the end of the live stream now. Let's go once around the horn and we'll wrap up. I can't wait to meet you guys in person in just a few weeks.
It's coming up soon.
Look up the rider again. I'm pretty sure bourbon's on there.
It's not.
Let me just say bourbon's not a problem for me to just make appear.
Okay. All right.
John, why don't you start?
Special Operations Equipment, SOE Tactical Gear is the name of my website where you can see all the merchandise and equipment that we make. I do a live every night on YouTube at 9:00. We can discuss whatever you guys want to talk about. And I've got over 5,000 videos on YouTube, and we're on every platform. Super easy to find, so reach out. It's usually me that actually replies to you.
Cool.
Andy and Doug, go for it.
So we're Andy Lane and Doug Wharton from Hand Hewn Farm in Fresno, Ohio. Most of our content, as it were, is usually on Instagram or Facebook, but we have started posting to YouTube. Or you can go to our website. We have event listings. We're doing events pretty much from October to May. We take the summers off. Workshops just about anywhere people will have us. We've been as far east as New Hampshire and as far west. We'll be going to Alaska later this year. So we go all over.
I love how that picture on your home page is like just a big pile of meat on a charcuterie platter that gets your attention, guys. It's handhewnfarm.com. And of course, they will be at Self-Reliance Festival doing a 2-day workshop before the festival. And then Saturday morning, they're doing a presentation about like homestead culinary experiences and how you can make it taste good. Like you can, which will fit really well with the Self-Reliant Kitchen presentation that's going to happen right around the same time. So you guys are going to be doing some interesting crossover. Alan Booker's doing that one. So that's over at selfreliancefestival.com. And guys, to wrap up, thanks to Hand Hewn Farm for giving us time today. Can't wait to meet you in person. We do have something in the offing for St. Patty's Day, March 17th at 7 p.m. We're going to be starting a 5-day series, which is called Self-Reliance Voices, Learning from Legends. And this is a way to get excited for Self-Reliance Festival. But also, if you're at home wondering, like, how do I get started? This has 5 days of practical ways to build resilience into your life, from some homesteading things to understanding how to analyze what's going on societally, to building soil. This is a huge undertaking, but also something that's very easy to do. 7 to 8 p.m. Central Time for 5 days. We'll be revisiting former sessions from Self-Reliance Festival. You'll be hearing from Joel Salatin. We've got Porterhouse, John Willis, CJ Kilmer. I'll be doing the Underground Networking presentation, and it's free. And this is over at selfreliancefestival.com/webinar. Get signed up for that, and we'd love to see you there. And then, of course, don't forget to get your tickets at selfreliancefestival.com for the festival. We'll see you soon. Bye, everybody. Thanks for being on.
Thank you.